Something satisfying just happened in the North. Something nobody inside the White House expected, and something nobody in Washington is prepared to explain. Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed master negotiator, the man who built his entire political identity around never backing down and always winning, just surrendered. Not after a brutal trade war lasting years. Not after months of painful economic sanctions. Not after some dramatic summit where both sides walked away bruised. No, he surrendered to Canada. He surrendered to Mark Carney. And here's the part that should make every American pay close attention. Carney did not even have to ask. There were no demands on the table. No ultimatums delivered behind closed doors. No dramatic phone call where Carney threatened retaliation. Trump simply reversed course. He pulled back tariffs. He softened his stance. He quietly walked away from the very economic confrontation he himself had started weeks earlier without extracting a single concession from Ottawa. Not one. The White House is scrambling to frame this as strategic flexibility. Advisors are leaking background quotes to friendly outlets trying to spin this as long-term repositioning rather than what it actually is, a retreat. But the diplomatic world sees through it. Analysts across Washington, London, and Brussels are using a word never associated with Trump: capitulation. This is not just a trade story. This is a moment that could reshape how the world views American negotiating power. If the president folds against Canada without pressure, what message does that send to Beijing, Tehran, Moscow, and every capital calculating how far they can push Washington? Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what you are about to hear is the full breakdown of one of the most quietly devastating diplomatic failures of this presidency. To understand how Donald Trump ended up surrendering to Canada without even being asked, you have to go back to the very foundation of this confrontation. This was never really about trade deficits or tariff imbalances. This was about identity. Trump came into office promising Americans that the era of being taken advantage of by allies was over. Canada was one of his earliest targets. He called NAFTA the worst trade deal ever made. He publicly humiliated Justin Trudeau on multiple occasions. He slapped tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum during his first term and framed it as a national security necessity. Canada was not a partner in Trump's worldview. Canada was a problem. And when Mark Carney became Prime Minister, the dynamic shifted in ways the White House did not anticipate. Carney was not Trudeau. He did not seek approval from Washington. He did not try to charm Trump with personal diplomacy. He came from the world of central banking, the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, and he understood leverage in ways that pure politicians often do not. Carney's approach was clinical and calculated. He did not escalate publicly. He did not engage in Twitter wars. He quietly began restructuring Canadian trade relationships to reduce dependency on the United States. When Trump launched his latest round of tariffs targeting Canadian goods in early 2025, he expected the usual pattern. He expected Canada to complain publicly, negotiate privately, and eventually accept whatever terms Washington dictated. That is what had always happened before. But Carney did something different. He said almost nothing. He let the tariffs take effect. He let American businesses feel the pain of disrupted supply chains. He let American farmers in border states watch their export markets tighten. He let the economic consequences speak louder than any press conference ever could. Within weeks, the pressure was not coming from Ottawa. It was coming from inside the United States. Republican governors in border states began calling the White House. Agricultural lobbies filed urgent complaints. Auto manufacturers warned of production slowdowns. Trump had created a crisis that was hurting his own base, and Carney had done nothing except wait. That patience is what made this collapse inevitable. Here is exactly how the surrender unfolded. In the first week of the tariff escalation, Trump was confident. White House communications painted Canada as a hostile trading partner exploiting American generosity. Press secretary statements emphasized that the tariffs were necessary to protect American workers, and that Canada would eventually come to the table begging for relief. Trump himself told reporters that Carney would be calling him within days. That call never came. By week 2, the economic data started arriving, and it was not good for Washington. Cross-border trade disruptions were hitting American manufacturers harder than Canadian ones. Auto parts that flow between Michigan and Ontario were delayed or rerouted. Dairy producers in Wisconsin and Vermont found their export channels narrowing. Energy trade between Alberta and American refineries faced new complications that threatened fuel prices in the Midwest. The pain was real, and it was American. The White House side claimed this was all part of a larger strategy. Senior advisors briefed reporters on background, saying that short-term pain was necessary for long-term leverage. They insisted that Trump was playing a longer game and that Canada would crack first. But behind closed doors, the story was very different. Economic advisors were presenting internal models showing that sustained tariffs against Canada would cost American consumers billions within months. Political advisors warned that midterm vulnerabilities were growing in exactly the states Trump needed most. The pressure was building from the inside out. On the Canadian side, Carney maintained complete discipline. His government issued measured public statements reaffirming Canada's willingness to negotiate fairly, but refusing to make preemptive concessions. Carney made no phone calls to Washington. He offered no back-channel deals. He simply continued governing as though the tariffs were Trump's problem to solve, not his. And that is exactly what they became. By week 3, Trump began signaling flexibility through intermediaries. Tariff exemptions appeared quietly for certain sectors. Rhetoric softened in press briefings. Then came the official rollback announced without fanfare on a Friday afternoon, the classic Washington move for burying embarrassing news. No concessions were extracted from Canada. The tariffs were simply reduced. Trump folded, and the evidence is undeniable.